Here's a business that looks like it prints money. 2 million square feet under one roof. 300 stores, every single one paying rent. A parking lot so full on a Saturday you circle twice just to find a spot. And the bank that financed it might foreclose within the year. Not because the mall is empty, because of what's actually holding the whole thing together and how fast that can come apart. If contradictions like that are your thing, you're in the right place. We take an asset everyone assumes they understand and show you the real math running underneath it every time. So go ahead and hit subscribe now. Because a shopping mall is nowhere near as simple as collect 300 rent checks and relax. Let's start with the part almost nobody outside the industry knows about, the anchor tenant deal. When a mall gets built, the big department store at the end, the Macy's, the Sears, whatever's standing in for it, usually doesn't pay full market rent. Sometimes it pays close to nothing. Sometimes the mall developer flat out gives it the land or even helps pay for its building. That sounds insane until you realize what the anchor is actually selling. Foot traffic. People don't drive to the mall for the mall. They drive there because a store they already trust is at the end of it, and everything in between just happens to be on the way. So the anchor isn't a tenant in the normal sense. It's more like the mall's engine, and the smaller shops around it are along for the ride, paying real rent, precisely because the anchor is dragging bodies past their storefront all day long. Which brings us to the part that actually breaks malls, something called a co-tenancy clause. Most of those 300 smaller leases have a line buried in them that says, roughly, if a certain anchor closes or if total mall occupancy drops below some threshold, the tenant gets to pay reduced rent or walk away from their lease entirely. No penalty. It's a protection tenants demanded, and it makes sense from their side. Nobody wants to keep paying full rent in a half-dead building. But it also means one department store closing its doors can legally trigger a wave of smaller stores, either slashing what they pay or leaving outright, sometimes within the same month. One thread pulled, and the whole fabric can start to unravel at once. That's not a slow decline, that's a cliff. Now, here's where it gets worse. When an anchor does close, the mall usually can't just knock the space down and build something new. A lot of anchor buildings were never technically owned by the mall in the first place. They're on a separate parcel governed by something called a reciprocal easement agreement, a decades-old legal contract between the mall and the original anchor that controls what can go in that specific building, sometimes indefinitely even after the anchor is long gone and the space sits dark. Industry people actually call it a dark anchor. It's not rented, it's not for sale, and legally, the mall's owner often can't touch it. A 200,000 square foot building just sits there empty, dragging down the whole property's appeal, and there's nothing anyone can immediately do about it. Let's talk about how the smaller stores actually pay, because it's not a flat number either. Most mall leases run on percentage rent, a base amount, plus a cut of whatever the store actually sells above a certain threshold. On top of that, tenants also pay their share of CAM, common area maintenance, which covers everything from mopping the food court to replacing the parking lot lighting, split across every store based on square footage. So when even a handful of stores leave, the ones who stay don't just lose neighbors. Their own CAM bill goes up, because there are fewer stores left to split the cost with. Staying in a struggling mall gets more expensive precisely because other people are leaving it. Now, stack financing on top of all of this. Most large malls weren't bought with a simple mortgage from a local bank. They're financed through something called a CMBS loan, commercial mortgage-backed securities, where the debt gets bundled up with other properties' debt and sold off to investors as bonds. That structure works fine when the mall's income comfortably covers its payments. The moment income falls below a certain ratio versus the debt, the loan gets flagged and handed over to something called special servicing, essentially a workout department for loans in trouble. From there, foreclosure becomes a very real possibility, and here's the brutal part. Malls that go through this route often sell for a tiny fraction of what they were once worth. Not because the real estate itself lost that much value, because a mall generating shrinking income tangled in co-tenancy clauses and dark anchors, simply isn't worth what it used to be to anyone who has to actually run it. And through all of this, property taxes usually don't drop nearly as fast as income does. Assessments are often based on past performance and comparable sales, so an owner can be paying taxes calculated on a thriving mall while actually operating a struggling one, waiting years for the assessment to catch up to reality. It's one more fixed cost that doesn't care what your food court looks like this quarter. Here's the twist that makes this whole story more interesting than a straight decline narrative, though. It's not that malls in general are dying. It's that they're splitting into two completely different businesses wearing the same name. The top tier, the well-located malls in wealthy areas, the ones with waitlists for retail space, are doing better than ever, commanding premium rents, adding restaurants and gyms and entertainment tenants that don't care about e-commerce because you can't exactly ship an hour on a climbing wall. Meanwhile, the bottom tier, the aging malls and shrinking mid-sized markets are the ones getting foreclosed on, torn down, or left half dark for a decade. Same asset class on paper. Completely different economics depending on which side of that line you're standing on. Redeveloping a dying mall doesn't solve this as easily as people assume either. Turning dead retail space into apartments or a mixed-use development sounds like the obvious fix, and sometimes it is, but it usually means untangling those same reciprocal easement agreements first, often across multiple separately owned anchor parcels, each with its own lender and its own incentive to say no. It's not unusual for a redevelopment to take longer and cost more than building an entirely new mall from scratch would have in the first place. So when you picture a shopping mall as 300 rent checks landing in one owner's account every month, you're picturing something that barely exists anymore. What actually exists is a tightly interlocked structure. Anchor deals holding up foot traffic, co-tenancy clauses that can unravel it overnight, decades-old legal agreements freezing dead space in place, and financing that punishes weakness the moment it shows up. Pull on the right thread, and a building that looked completely full on a Saturday afternoon can be in the special servicing by spring. If this breakdown was useful, go ahead and subscribe for more like it. Drop a like and tell me in the comments if you've ever walked through a mall that felt half dead without knowing why. And if you know someone who'd get something out of this, send it their way.